Hello, my name is Ashley Kearney. Welcome to my session. Today I'll be talking with you about increasing opportunities to learn and raising expectations for all students. Following my presentation, I'll be responding to your questions in the chat space for the live Q&A. So let's get started. A significant amount of research has shown that adolescents' brains work differently than adults when they make decisions or solve problems. Their actions are guided more by the emotional and reactive amygdala and less by the thoughtful, logical frontal cortex. While my role has transitioned to system wide approaches for integrating whole child anti racist lens across district level teams as a catalyst for shifts at all levels of the system, the belief I have about the power of such approach is the result of documented successes I've experienced in my practice as a math educator. This work has always been about a commitment to equity. With respect to mathematics, I hope to begin to answer two questions in this presentation. One, how do we increase opportunities to learn? And two, how do we raise the expectations for all students? I'll do this by painting an illustration of the monumental task at hand and articulating how having a North Star of equity while building on our understanding of brain science is a step in the right direction. I want to set the tone with a statement I adapted from Emotional Good session at the 2019 ERA annual meeting. And that is, good instruction is driven by values and informed by evidence. I was watching a YouTube video recently where Dr. Moon Dushin was the keynote speaker at the 2018 Math Prize for Girls. She presented on redistricting as a math problem, and I was absolutely fascinated. Anyway, during her talk, she helps us grapple with a fictional case of orange pink land that consists of 10 districts displayed in a 10 by 10 grid. Orange pink land is said to have two types of voters, 60% pink and 40% orange voters. If given complete omniscience and omnipotence, the voters can be sorted at will under the sole condition that there should be an equal amount of voters in each district. She then poses a leading question. It's fair that orange should win 4 seats, right? While leaving space for people to reflect on their beliefs on whether orange should get more seats or less seats. As lines are drawn, different iterations of the maps are produced. She goes on to explain how the shapes of the districts brings awareness to the various differences, mainly that eccentric shapes could hint that something is happening. However, it's not until we can actually see the stories once it's unveiled behind the lines. There are many ways that voters could be distributed within the lines. Given the displays, here are a few examples. She notes that those who are from orange pink land may see things that others don't immediately see, and how it's not until you uncover again what's beneath the shape that you begin to understand those stories. On the left, the far left, you'll see that orange would get 40% of every district in this scenario, in which case orange has no representation in any of the districts. In the middle case, the rearranging shows that the percentages results in what was positioned before we thought would be fair, 40% representation because you have 40% voters. Well, it turns out orange winning 40% of the seats, you'll find that in some cases, there are little to no orange people in some of the districts. It has potential huge implications. Then you get to the possibility on the right, which is the highest possible case where orange could win 6 seats. However, as displayed in the far right graph, observing the possibilities of voter behavior in several trials of this specific map, the data reveals that the map where orange can win 6 seats actually materializes into 0 representation. How? Where Dr. Dushin talks about how it might be transportation, voters living too far from polling, and other barriers. Nonetheless, that's a very different story being told. I walked away with 3 main things that resonated with me from a presentation. 1, context is important. 2, the possibility space is vast. And 3, addressing barriers is non-negotiable. For me, Dr. Dushin's presentation was about a commitment to equity. Addressing the achievement gap requires a commitment to equity. A commitment to equity in the math classroom requires a commitment to high expectations and access to learning opportunities. A commitment to equity in the classroom, transitively, right? Well, transitively, addressing the achievement gap requires a commitment to high expectations and access to opportunities to learn. So, what does our system say about our country's expectations of all children? There are stories behind the math scores shared in the nation's report card. There were students who took the 2022 assessment following a period of learning during the pandemic without having access to computers, laptops, tablets all the time. Also, without having access to a quiet space to learn or work at least some of the time. And without having access to their teacher to help with schoolwork at the same cadence as others. Those conditions and many other unnamed are further indications of the inequities that exist in a system full of other barriers to access, spanning longer than the assessment and any targeted response aimed at addressing the data. The achievement levels are created and defined by people and do not tell the complete story of students. Nonetheless, if we were to look at the data that's displayed on the screen, we can see that Black students had a lower average decline in scores. Further, Black students who performed at the 25th percentile had a smaller decline than white students in the same percentile. The gap in the scores, however, indicate the 25th percentile for Black and white students certainly sends a signal about the impact of the decline for Black students. This is especially the case for economic productivity. In 2019, the Econometric Society and International Society for the Advancement of Economic Theory in its relation to statistics and mathematics published an article in its journal titled The Allocation of Talent and Growth in the US, which noted findings of a well-cited study which stated 40% of per capita GDP growth from 1960 to 2010 can be accounted for by women and Black men entering highly skilled occupations. Well, between 2019 publication and 2022 assessments that students took, the pearls of being Black in America, especially the state of Black males, were ever present on the screens, hearts, and minds across the country. Further evident by the 2020 Commission on the Social Status of Black Men and Boys, established in the Commission on the Social Status of Black Men and Boys. Also evident in the disparities in education. Access to learning opportunities and high expectations are hallmarks of good instruction. In the glossary of education reform, high expectations typically refers to the effort to set the same educational standard for all students in a class, in a school, or educational system. The opportunity gap refers to the opportunities in which race, ethnicity, social and economic status, familiar situations, and other factors contribute to or perpetuate lower educational aspirations, achievement, and attainment for certain groups of students. In terms of performance expectations, the achievement levels in mathematics on the nation's report card correspond to item expectations. Low complexity items expect students to recall, to recognize concepts or procedures. The student is not left to come up with an original method or to demonstrate a line of reasoning. For moderate complexity items, the categories involve more flexibility of thinking and choice among alternatives than those in the low complexity category. Students might be asked to show or explain their work, but would not be expected to justify it mathematically. On the other hand, high complexity items make heavy demands on students because they are expected to use reasoning, planning, analysis, judgment, and creative thought. Students may be expected to justify mathematical statements or construct mathematical arguments. On the screen, you'll see a low complexity item that can be turned into a moderate complexity item by asking the question for students to write the equation versus to identify it. The framework claims that ideal balance is an expectation of students working on moderate complexity items for 50% of the time and assessment items that are 50% select response and 50% constructed response. Consider, what does a classroom environment look like, feel like, sound like that would position students to be able to complete the previously displayed item with moderate complexity and shift it to a constructive response where drawings and no verbal communication are involved. Furthermore, what must be true about the student's well-being in order for them to engage in an assessment at mostly moderate complexity at a proficient plus performance level? Echoed in the Alliance for Excellent Education's 2018 Science of Adolescent Learning report, the learning environment plays a significant role in brain development. We can use the mind to control physical conditions. It's my thought. I was consumed with it so much that I was obsessed with how a student perceived our learning environment, which largely lays the foundation for this presentation. Mind over matter is about perception. Noticing and understanding what is not necessarily obvious to other people is complex. Adding to that, the complexity of cultural influences of perception, particularly in educational environments where we have to be both proactive and responsive. I'm hoping a quick crosswalk of concepts in the displayed text help me to lay the foundation for understanding how the power of emotion can be leveraged to both raise expectations and increase opportunities to learn. As referenced in emotional intelligence, the brain is hardwired to give emotions the upper hand. In emotional intelligence, everything you sense has to pass through your limbic system to get to the frontal lobe. We feel before we are able to think. Social competence allows us some social awareness and relationship management skills. It's our ability to understand other people's moods, their behaviors, and motives in order to improve the quality of relationships, which we know is critical for learning to take place. In mathematical mindsets, we know that mindsets are critically important because research has shown that they lead to different learning behaviors, which in turn create different learning outcomes for students. Mathematical mindsets goes on to further put emphasis on what we know about mathematics, which is more than any other subject, it has the power to crush students' spirits. Students receive and absorb indirect messages about mathematics through many aspects of mathematics teaching. A lot of scientific evidence suggests that the difference between those who succeed and those who do not succeed is not based on the brain that they were born with, but their approach to life, the messages they receive about their potential, and the opportunities they have to learn. I believe it is culturally responsive tool. Emotion is a culturally responsive tool and strategy with cultural influences. In culturally responsive teaching in the brain, it talks about building background knowledge as beginning with becoming knowledgeable about the dimensions of culture as well as other things. Deep culture also governs how we learn new information. This level, the brain encoding itself with a particular worldview, where elements at this level have an intense emotional charge. The brain's two main directives are to stay safe and be happy. I walked away with a final thought on the main purpose of the brain is to get smarter at surviving and thriving. So, what does that mean for me? Just by quick glance, especially with those who have an increased resonation by cultural proximity, it may be clear how students positioned in the deficit when it comes to viewing and discussing achievement gaps are actually experienced problem solvers. So, knowing the brain's two main directives and its purpose, what does it mean to survive and thrive in a math classroom? First and foremost, we have our philosophy. For me, in secondary mathematics, it was often the first thing on my class syllabus. But in classes, we also have class values and co-creative vision and goals and so on and so forth. Given the initial framing of good instruction being driven by values, the bullet points or numbers displayed on the screen are not representative of the list of aforementioned aspects of my classroom, rather a non-exhaustive list of the themes that resonated as I reflected on the ways that those values, goals, and policies and practices were activated day to day with the intent that students are positioned to thrive. I started in middle school mathematics, the best training grounds, and I understood very quickly the power of emotion. With over a decade of experience in the classroom and documented successes, I know emotion to be an ingredient, a key ingredient. Moreover, I made an effort to plan for emotion. Hence one, emotion. Planning for it in the beginning, middle, and end of a high quality task, in the middle, beginning and end of class, a unit, a year, celebrations, class roles, intentional interactions with people and content, etc. An example is the brain break that is displayed on the screen, where students are not only engaged in that brain break, but it's also meant to help build relationship skills. Again, emotion is the long game. Two, connected to emotion is action, verbal and nonverbal. Class values are living and breathing and celebrated. And three, this action is modeled and reciprocated. The actions of learning about ourselves, reflecting on what we learned about ourselves for more than just in the classroom, and applying that in the way we choose to show up, gives a new way to voice and choice. We are the captains. Henceforth, although not an exhaustive list, I share specific strategies related to this in my Peers in Pedagogy article titled Structures Make You Lose Control. But at the core is truly thinking about the emotions students need in order to be positively positioned and feel and sincerely believe they have and are the captains of their own ship. It's the way, funded by why, we communicate. It's on you. Sometimes locus of control can be an issue. But five, being resourceful and making a dollar out of 15 cents comes in handy. As an educator, in the face of certain circumstances, that has looked like detracking with exposure, combating impoverished mathematics, and frequently and consistently going above and beyond the curriculum in the classroom. A personal trip to the International Spy Museum for inspiration on a unit was brought up in a conversation with a long-term substitute in the teacher's lounge, which resulted in my learning about his work and him, in turn, coming to classroom to teach our students. The course was inclusive of hidden objectives of respecting our elders and respecting the profession, but mostly him sharing his skills that connected to our unit. Anyway, some initial body language may suggest that the immediate feelings of students, good, bad, or indifferent. But after hearing his story, being intrigued by the medals and experience in representation, the emotion shifts. Students are interacting and learning about how to use the processes to communicate certain messages, of which we connect in the unit to our work with factoring polynomials. The emotion is captured. Pictured is a student of the week, and next to our distinguished in-house presenter who received a certificate from the class signed by the class leader and the teacher. Emotion. In Chapter 9 of the Science of Learning Development, Enhancing the Lives of All Young People, now Suad Nazir provides commentary on teaching for equity, where developmental needs meets racialized structures. The line that resonated immediately was, learning is a complex endeavor, and one that involves the whole child, not the brain or mind separate from other developmental domains. I'm sure that's music to the ears of any council following folks. Being whole child purpose and equity minded and charged by my experiences from the classroom, I know that students have the potential. The push has always been What barriers do we need to dismantle, and what improvements need to be made to respond to the learning and developmental needs of our students? For me, tapping into the power of emotion in the classroom can support greater efforts with social emotional learning and leveraging that to raise expectations and increase opportunities for learning. The power of emotion was evident through social awareness development when bridging, building on logs and geometric series to include not only mathematics behind buying a house with students, but exploring home buying and the impacts of gentrification with houses on sale in their neighborhood. Or when students attended budget roundtables hosted by the mayor in their community, and understanding how they can inform the budget cycle with intent to share with their peers, inviting representatives from the mayor's office of community action, and to speak with the students and have those experiences inform their classroom assignments, where students not only co-plan an event for engaging families and community members in the conversation at our school, but leveraging those spaces to share with stakeholders and leaders the ideas around neighborhood redesign and development visible in their geometry project displays talking about livable scores. The power of emotion showed up in connecting waves in the students' passion for DJing and music to trigonometry lessons on behavior of trig functions. Emotion can be evoked through connections to partnership, where in this case, our partners provided us an opportunity for a free day trip to JFK, where students not only not well, not only were there opportunities for experiential learning, but also opportunities to gain context of the issues of the field and beyond, such as the importance of safety on the tarmac through built-in components of service learning, and exploring the many connections and possibilities in the field of aviation. That provides hands-on experiences that stamp learning in their memory, ready to be activated. However, as one would expect with adolescence, emotions can be a roller coaster. Tapping into our emotions give us context, help us access the range of possibilities, and is a lever for removing barriers. The power of emotion can contribute to a student's self-efficacy, and self-efficacy is extricable from locus of control. With the task of closing the achievement gap, tapping into emotions can be instrumental. It comes down to mind over matter. Please chat with me live in the chat for Q&A session or connect with me online in X or LinkedIn at Ashley C. Kearney. Thank you. All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the presentation. Happy to chat with you, and you can join us in the chat and ask your questions looking at the right hand of the screen. And I know that there is a slight delay in questions in the chat versus when I will see them, but I'm very grateful for your presence in the session. And also, if you don't have questions, just general takeaways, I will happily receive those as well. So the question, do you find it helps students and teachers introduce them to brain science and the connections with learning? I do think it helps to be explicit, but also I think that the actions that we have and the interactions to build trust and safety also speaks to children and it teaches them as well. So even things we put up in our classroom, but certainly how we relate to students teaches them and making moments to show how they can speak about how the brain is working, like literally articulate it, but also model that with their behavior. So yes and yes. In DC, are teachers in DC studying and incorporating SEL? Yes, and I think it goes further. So it's not just social emotional learning, but it's the social emotional learning and the academics piece and bridging them to make sure that it doesn't live separate. So while there is exploration for what that does for the curriculum, I think also in the line of work is thinking about the conditions and structures that enable that learning to happen. Hopefully that answered it. If not, if you want to ask another question, I think we have some time for several more. I'm excited to hear what's going on in Oregon as well. I think one thing that tends to stand out, at least in math education, in terms of mind over matter and what made me sort of craft this session is the intentionality around emotion can be something that seems intangible. But if we think about our daily interaction, how every single interaction communicates either a trusting or distrusting situation for students, and at every age, the development of that child is important, then the way that they experience class and the way they experience us as teachers can certainly influence their learning, not only at that moment, but also over time. And then especially thinking about emotions, because when we think about achievement, sometimes we get caught up in the assessments, but it's also not only what I think about assessments, how I experience an assessment, but how am I preparing not only academically for the assessment, but how am I emotionally preparing for the assessment, and how I, as an educator, can really understand a student by thinking about and understanding and identifying what makes them have a trigger and or what makes them feel loved, and more so what makes them feel loved, because focusing on those positive things more often than not can give us the response that we want. Oh, thanks. All right, welcome. Yeah, I can elaborate on the article. The article is actually with Achieve the Core, and they actually have, pedagogy from the field where educators can contribute practices that actually work. And I think in the playbook that I described, there were certain roles that are intentionally designed in a classroom space around the emotion that we want to create. Like the learning environment is literally creating what I want you to experience, while also also honoring what you bring to the space. So a role that can be a captain, right? And sometimes we think about a captain with having certain powers, but that can be co-created with the class. In one class, I think I spoke specifically in the article where, because one of our students actually called himself the deacon, right? We had a chaplain. Now that can get sticky in some situations, but bringing that into the class roles was very important. And it actually made such an influence that the class tended to run itself. And I think that that's what we all want. And it gives us a space where we can actually step back and again, be attuned with the emotions that are happening in the space as students continue to own their learning. Yes. If I could have done the presentation, there were so many things I wanted to talk about and why it's so important for us to have mind over matter. Not only thinking about what's happening in the student's brain, but certainly thinking about what's happening in the educator's brain, and how do we understand the connection between the two. It certainly connects to math identities, which is a catalyst for so much in terms of how our students see themselves as mathematicians, and also not limiting mathematicians to one frame of thought, right? I was attending other sessions during this summit, and I think they did an incredible job of saying how the future holds so many jobs that we don't even know about that incorporate math. And so us being able to explore that, and knowing as educators, we don't have all those answers of the future, but our responsibility in the now, and how us connecting with the mind and connecting with the brain while also staying on top of trends can help prepare our students for that. Please keep the questions coming, or even if you have, things that you've experienced where, it will be helpful for me in this presentations or for others in the chat, to please put it there. I think I also wanted to name how our expectations, students are meeting our expectations. And some people will say, well, students are not meeting our expectations. Look at the numbers, look at the data. And I think that our expectations are communicated, at a national level, right? Not our desires, but literally what we expect in the things that are either said in policies, things that are enacted in practice or not. That is also communicating our expectations. And we have to confront the fact that there are some things that need to shift so that what is espoused actually comes out in practice, so that students will meet the expectations that we desire for them to have, not only in mind, but also in the reality. So I think that's one piece that is something that I wanted to lift up in the session. If there are other questions, please keep them coming in the chat. Things that maybe resonated from the session, or questions that you have about a particular portion, or something that you're grappling with. I did speak about the fact that the session itself and what I was speaking about came from my experience in the classroom, but I certainly also want to name that it actually helped my approach in school improvement. And everything we do is supposed to impact teaching and learning. And I think that everything that you saw in the presentation is just a smidgen
of what I take forward in practice now in terms of like system improvement. In DC, not just I work at district level, but at the state level, I'm aware of the SEL standards in practice, and DC is actually working on standards as well. And as you might note, even in other states are also working on SEL standards. And what's important there is to think about what makes it explicit and what will make districts adopt it, and what actually will happen in the day-to-day operations being included in how we write those standards. But in terms of your comment, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing more that comes out of the SEL standards for the state math team in Oregon. I was recently doing a math council, and what that does at the state level is bring teachers, and this is something that I started while as a teacher leader, and I just asked the state level, hey, I noticed that I was a part of this council, and I noticed that there was no isolated conversation for just math. So we were able to make that happen. And in doing so, even in its in subsequent years, we're now having spaces where, you know, math educators can contribute to these types of conversations, but also contribute to the policies that are designed based on these types of conversations. So it's huge. And one of the top topics for this year is going to be SEL. So I'm definitely going to highlight some of that work as we look at their modules this year. Feel free for folks to connect with me again on LinkedIn and on X. It's Ashley C. Kearney.